Chapter 1. A Port in Winter. The wind that swept the coast of Shieldaig in the month of Capricorn was a beast with teeth of ice. It dragged the salt mist from a grey, churning sea and laid a thin frost over the slate roofs and stone piers of the port. It was a wind that promised endings, not beginnings. That was why, when the watchmen in the tower spotted the ship, they did not sound the alarm, but merely watched with a grim curiosity. It was no threat. It was a wounded ghost. A lone, long ship of unmistakable Midgard design, the serpent head of its prow splintered, its single sail in tatters. It moved with the slowness of a dying animal, seeking a final place to rest. When it finally docked, scraping timber against the frosted stone, the guards of House McLasrack were already there. Not with swords drawn, but with hands on their hilts, a silent warning. 3 figures disembarked. The first was an old woman, leaning on a rune staff, her back straight despite the ravages of time and travel. The second was a giant of a man, with a braided beard and a great axe on his back, whose slumped posture spoke of a defeat deeper than mere fatigue. The third was a small girl, no more than 11 cycles old, who clung to her father's leg, her wide eyes taking in everything with a mixture of fear and defiance. They were led without a word through the streets of Crow's Pass. The girl, Erla, squeezed the hand of her father, Bjorn, more tightly. The dark stone houses seemed to stare at them, their windows like empty eyes. Everything here was hard, sharp, and gray, so unlike the timber holes and green fjords of their lost home. The tower of the McLasracks rose above the town like an accusing finger of stone. They were brought to the main hall, a place designed to make men feel small. The ceiling was a vault of shadows. The walls were hung with banners bearing the emblem of a red serpent wreathed in flames, and the echoes of their footsteps resonated in the oppressive silence. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne of carved darkwood, was Lord Alistair McLasrack. He was not a large man, but his stillness gave him an immense weight. At his side, in a slightly lower chair, sat his son, Alistair II, a boy of 14 cycles with red hair and a freckled face, who watched them with the same analytical intensity as his father. Bjorn stepped forward, the sound of his boots on the stone like thunder in the quiet. His pride visibly wrestled with his desperation. "We seek asylum, Lord McLasrack," said Bjorn, each word seeming to cost him a piece of his soul. His voice was a deep rumble, thick with the accent of Midgard. "I am Bjorn, of Clan Vanagonda. This is my mother, Astrid, and my daughter, Erla." Lord Alistair raised an eyebrow, his piercing green eyes showing neither sympathy nor hostility. It was the look of a scholar examining a specimen. "The sagas of the Vanagonda have reached even our shores, man of Midgard," Lord Alistair replied, his voice a calm counterpoint to the giants. "As has the news that your clan is no more. Asylum is a precious commodity, and often brings with it the troubles from which one flees. What do you offer in return?" Bjorn clenched his jaw. "We offer the only thing we have left, our axes and our loyalty. We are swords without sheaths. We will fight for you." "A powerful weapon, to be sure," Lord Alistair mused, tilting his head. "But weapons sometimes have a will of their own." It was then that the old woman struck the floor with her staff. The sharp sound cracked through the air. "My son speaks with too much humility, Lord of Shieldegg," said Astrid, her voice frail but as sharp as crystal. "We do not come to beg. We are the last breath of a great storm. Give us a place to stand, and we shall tear your enemies out by the root." An almost imperceptible smile, so fast it might have been an illusion, crossed Lord Alistair's lips. His gaze left the defiant matriarch and settled on the girl. Erla, feeling the stare upon her, lifted her chin and met it without flinching. "Very well," Lord Alistair said at last. He rose, his movements elegant and deliberate. "I accept your service. There is land on the edge of the forest, untamed and beset by beasts. If you can tame it, it is yours. Your axes will belong to my house, but there is one further condition." He pointed a long, pale finger at the girl. "She will be educated here, in my tower, alongside my son. She will learn our history, our ways, and our magic. I do not want a mindless war dog. I want a loyal, intelligent wolf. Her heritage is her strength. We shall not crush it. We shall sharpen it." Bjorn looked as if he might protest. The idea of giving his only child over to a foreign house is anathema. But Astrid's hand on his arm stopped him. The matriarch nodded slowly. A fair pact. The lord sat back down, his decision final. So be it. In the silence that followed, the two children looked at each other across the vast hall. Alistair II, the heir, watched the wild girl with analytical curiosity, and Erla, the exile, looked at the red-haired boy not with submission, but with the assessment of an equal. Neither of them could have known it then, but in that silent exchange, the seeds of a legend and the fate of the entire north of Albion had just been planted. Chapter 2. The Tower and the Hall. The first Orbis in Crow's Pass were a lesson in contrasts for Erla. Her life was divided into two worlds, separated by barely 500 paces of muddy track, yet a universe apart in spirit. Her mornings began in the cold, silent library of the McClasrack Tower. The tutor, a cleric named Brother Theron, was a patient man with soft hands and a monotonous voice. Upon a polished oak table, he would unroll maps of Centra, scrolls of history, and heavy tomes of Hellas philosophy. "The power of the Valorian Empire, Erla, lies not in the strength of its knights, but in the cohesion of its feudal structure," Theron would explain, his finger tracing the borders on the map. Erla would nod, trying to concentrate. She would glance at Alistair, seated opposite her. He seemed to absorb the knowledge effortlessly, his green eyes moving rapidly over the text, his quill scratching across parchment as he took notes in a flawless hand. Sometimes he would notice her distraction. "It is not a dragon, Erla. It is a supply line," he whispered one morning, a flicker of amusement on his lips as she gazed out of the window following the flight of a hawk. "The hawk is at least going somewhere," she muttered back, earning a warning glance from the tutor. Alistair was her constant companion in these lessons. 3 cycles her senior, he often acted as a second teacher, explaining the more complex concepts with a logic that, unlike Theron's, she could grasp. Think of magic as water in a pipe, Erla. The ars magica is the tap. The visualization is telling the water exactly where to go. If your visualization is a mess, you will flood the room. "I would rather break the pipe and let the water sweep everything away," she replied, frustrated, after her attempt to light a candle resulted in a mere spark and a puff of smoke. "I know," Alistair said with patience that disarmed her, "but even a flood can be directed." The afternoons were her release. She would return to the long hall her father was building with his own hands, a home of dark timber and the scent of pine that was a piece of Midgard in the middle of Albion. There, the learning was different. "Shield up!" Bjorn would roar, his wooden training axe whistling through the air. "A warrior who watches their feet is a dead warrior. Feel your opponent. Do not watch them." The impact of the axe against her small shield would send a shock through her entire arm, but she would grit her teeth and hold her ground. These were lessons etched in pain and sweat. At night, by the fire, her grandmother Astrid taught her another kind of magic. There were no pipes or taps in Astrid's lessons. "Magic, child, is not in books. It is in the blood, the soil, and the sky," the old woman would say, her voice a crackling whisper as she carved a rune into a piece of wood. "When you feel the rage, do not smother it. Turn it to ice. Give it a shape. Give it a blade. The cold is deadlier than fire, for it is a fury with purpose." One day, after a particularly grueling session with her father, Alistair found her sitting by the river, throwing stones into the water with a quiet fury. He sat beside her, saying nothing for a long time. "My father says I must learn to command 1,000 men," Alistair said, finally staring at the water. "He teaches me of morale, logistics, the terrain. My father teaches me how to kill one man who stands right in front of me." "Perhaps," said Alistair, picking up a flat stone, "you need to know both to survive here." He flicked the stone, and it skipped 3 times across the surface before sinking. Erla watched him, then picked up a similar stone. She tried to mimic his wrist movement. Her stone sank with a dull plop. Alistair smiled. "It is all technique, not strength." Erla scowled, took another stone, and instead of trying to skip it, she hurled it with all her might at a boulder on the opposite bank, splitting it with a sharp crack. "Sometimes strength works just as well," she declared. Alistair looked at her, then at the sundered boulder, and a genuine laugh escaped him. For the first time, it was not the amused laugh of a tutor, but that of a friend. Erla, surprised, found herself smiling back. In that moment, by the river that divided their 2 worlds, the 2 children found common ground, a bridge built on the understanding that, for all their differences, they each possessed something the other desperately needed. Chapter 3. Londinium. The Orbis passed, the Vanagunda Long Hall was completed, a bastion of Midgard culture in the heart of Albion. Erla grew, her body hardened by daily training, her hands calloused. Alistair grew also, his mind sharpened by every book he devoured, his magic refined with an implacable discipline. Their friendship, forged on the riverbank, became a silent alliance. On the day Alistair turned 17 cycles, Lord Alistair summoned both him and Erla to his study. "The time has come," Lord Alistair announced, his voice without inflection. "As is tradition, you will go to Londinium, to the Royal Academy. Though the standard age of entry is 18 cycles, your aptitudes are exceptional. I have secured an early admission." Alistair nodded. It was what he had expected his whole life. Erla, now with 14 cycles, frowned. "Londinium? With the Southerners?" Precisely. The academy is not only for nobles. The crown and the great houses sponsor commoners of extraordinary talent seeking the best for their armies and courts. You will measure yourselves against the elite of Centra, the Lord explained. The training lasts 4 orbis. It culminates in the royal stratagem. Afterwards, if you wish, there is the University of Centra to specialize. But these 4 orbis are crucial. You will learn from our allies and, more importantly, from our enemies. You leave at dawn.
Chapter 4. The Academy and a Stratagem. Life in Londinium was a cultural shock. Alistair flourished. He immersed himself in the vast libraries, engaged in heated philosophical debates, and joined the dueling club, where his precise and defensive style made him a feared opponent. Erla, on the other hand, detested the superficial politics and intrigues of the student court. She found her refuge in the training yards. In her first weeks, a 4th Orbis noble attempted to humiliate her in a training bout. "Let us see what the northern savage can do," he said with disdain. Erla endured his taunts until the match began. Then, with a speed and ferocity that left everyone speechless, she disarmed him, floored him, and placed her foot on his chest in under 10 seconds. No one ever called her a savage to her face again. Alistair helped her to navigate the social complexities, and she dragged him to the training yards, reminding him that a book could not stop the edge of a sword. In their 4th and final Orbis, the time came for the Royal Stratagem, the war games in which all students participated. They formed their team, the Northern Sentinels, recruiting other outcasts with exceptional talents. When the games began, they were underestimated, but in the second week, they faced the favorites, the Lions of Astolat. "No more running, Northerners," shouted their leader, Lord Valerius. Erla looked at Alistair. He gave a slight nod. "It is time," he said. "Show them why the wolf is the queen of the forest." Erla drew her sword. "Sentinels, with me!" she roared. "Ars Magica, Fenris Kappa." An explosion of glacial aura enveloped her. She charged, and her small team followed. The battle was short and brutal. Erla fought her way through to Lord Valerius and defeated him in single combat. Silence fell over the field. The Lions of Astolat surrendered. Though they finished second in the overall standings, their victory over the Lions and their innovative Crucible and Forge combination tactic made them the legend of the tournament. They returned to the north, not as students, but as veterans.
Chapter 5. The Siege of Shieldegg. The true test came in the winter of Orbis 7025. It began with a frantic message. A spy of Lord Alistair's, posted on the borders of Midgard, sent a raven with a desperate warning. A massive confederation of Midgard clans, led by one Snorri Ketilsson of Clan Steinbjorn, had assembled a war fleet. Their intention, confirmed by the spy, was chillingly calculated: to abduct Erla for a forced marriage and absorb her Varnaganda warrior bloodline. The rest of her family and their Maclazrak hosts were simply to be executed. On the 20th day of Capricorn, the fleet appeared. 65 great Roskilde-class warships darkened the horizon. With Snorri Ketilsson sailed the leaders of 8 other powerful clans: the formidable Asta Magnusdottir of Clan Hravendal, Raven Hraven Kelsen of Clan Drakiheimer, the cunning Jon Haldorsson of Clan Weitfanger, Freydis Haraldsdottir of Clan Skjaldmeyr, the veteran Geir Oddson of Clan Fjallauge, the reckless Arnar Johansson of Clan Vindheimer, the young and ambitious Leif Sigurdsson of Clan Solhaver, and the rune witch Elisabeth Runersdottir of Clan Manades. Together, they commanded a force of 11,443 warriors and mages. Against this deluge stood the defenders of Shieldegg, Clan Varnaganda and the Earls Maclasrach, with a total force of 4,598 men and women, 4 old galleons, and a single, unproven steam-powered frigate. Their situation was made even more desperate by political intrigue. Snorri's clans had brokered a deal with the clergy, declaring the invasion an internal affair between clans. Albion was forbidden to intervene. They were alone. The battle began at sea. Alistair, aboard the steam frigate, became a naval puppet master. "To starboard! Now, Ars Magica, Murus Ceneris!" he commanded. Despite their well-coordinated defense, the Shieldegg vessels were not enough to stop the entire enemy fleet. Half of the longships managed to break through and land their warriors, shifting the battle to the city streets and forcing Alistair to reorganize his defense on land. For 7 days, Shieldegg was an inferno. Erla and her father, Bjorn, were everywhere, a pair of whirlwinds of steel and ice, their armor soon coated in blood and mud. "Hold fast! For your homes! Hold fast!" they roared, their fervor infectious. Meanwhile, high in the tower, Alistair fought alongside his father, Lord Alistair, launching advanced spells to decimate enemy ranks and organizing troop movements with lethal precision. "Erla, to your left, a band of berserkers at the west gate," his voice would resonate from the runestone she carried. On the 7th day, they repelled the final assault. The Varnaganda and Maclasrach victory was a testament to their tenacity, but it came at a terrible cost. Approximately 1,200 of their defenders had fallen, and one of their galleons was lost. The blow dealt to the enemy, however, was catastrophic, with an estimated loss of over 4,000 warriors. The surviving enemy vessels vanished into the northern mist, fleeing towards a secret fort in the Arctic. "It is not over," Alistair said that night. "They have fled to Fort Hell." "Then we will hunt them," Erla replied, "and we will end this for good."
Chapter 6. The Battle of Fort Hell. The pursuit led them into the desolate waters of the Arctic. On the 2nd day of Aquarius, as they approached Fort Hell, a new fleet appeared on the horizon. "More enemies," Erla muttered, exhausted, her hand instinctively reaching for her axe. Tension gripped their depleted fleet. At first they thought they were reinforcements for the traitor clans. But Alistair, peering through his spyglass, shook his head, a slow smile forming on his face. "No, that is the banner of the Konunga." What the enemy clans had not counted on in their arrogance was that their unauthorized invasion would be considered treason to their own king. The Konunga of Midgard, Thorvaldr Drakensvard, enraged by the challenge to his crown, had set sail with his loyalists. Alongside the king's personal guard of 1,558 warriors sailed 3 of the most powerful and fiercely loyal clans. Sigriva Bjarnadottir of Clan Eldfjall, with 1,423 of her finest fighters. Einar Thorsteinsson of Clan Ulfskald, with 1,005 axes. And Skuli Erensson of Clan Hafnjor, with a force of 1,652. Their combined might joined the roughly 3,300 remaining defenders of Shieldegg, forming an imposing allied host of nearly 8,938 warriors. The battle that followed at Fort Hell was of unparalleled brutality. The assault on the fortress was a desperate slaughter on both sides, and soon the white lands and the sea ice were soaked in blood. The victory went to the Konunga's alliance, but it was a Pyrrhic victory, bought at a high price in lives. In the end, Thorvaldr captured the surviving traitor leaders. "Who financed you?" the Konunga demanded, his sword at Snorri's throat. Snorri only smiled, his teeth bloody, a final defiant sneer in his eyes. "The world is larger than you think, old king." Following this final insolence, Snorri and the other leaders were sentenced. The Konunga gathered their sons and heirs. He spared their lives on two conditions: that they swear absolute and unbreakable loyalty to his crown, and that they reveal everything they knew. Terrified and humiliated, the young heirs spoke. They had little information, only fragments of conversations and rumors that the instigators were a powerful faction from Centra. Those who knew the full truth, who had made the pacts and received the payment, were the clan leaders, and they chose to die rather than reveal the names of their sponsors. The secret they took to their graves. The victory was theirs, but the war, they realized, had just begun, and the shadow of a faceless enemy now loomed over them all.
Chapter 7. Prelude to a Great War. The Orbis following the Battle of Fort Hell was one of tense peace. As the northern clans rebuilt, investigations by Konungur Thorvaldr and Lord Alistair revealed a terrifying truth. The attack's sponsor was not a single nation, but a secret faction within the Via del Eco. They were fanatics, clerics who believed they had heard a new voice that seduced them and commanded them to corrupt the word, declaring the Vonnegunder bloodline a heresy that must be purged. The legitimate clergy, aware of the threat, tried to mitigate the fanatics, but they were already too deeply entrenched within the institution. The truth of why Albion had not come to Shieldeg's aid was also revealed. King Ead Domnavaros of Albion had been caught between a rock and a hard place. Some of his most powerful nobles, conspiring with the fanatic clergy, had threatened him. The Edict of Non-Intervention was in reality blackmail. If Albion moved, Hispania, Gallia, and Germany would launch a coordinated attack. What the conspirators did not expect was that Shieldeg would resist and that Erla and Alistair would push the invaders all the way to the Arctic. With the conspiracy exposed, but the culprits still in power, war became inevitable. On the 14th of Scorpius, in Orbis 7026, the fanatic faction forced a formal declaration of war against Midgard and House Maclasrak, and consequently against the crown of Albion. Midgard and Albion sealed a historic alliance. Eriu remained neutral. The coalition of the Northern Alliance clashed immediately with the ships of Germany. In a brutal naval battle, they managed to break through thanks to the steam-powered frigate and began to attack the German army. The response from their enemies was massive and coordinated. Latium's army was already on the march to reinforce Germany. Gallia's fleet set sail, this time with the intention of striking directly at the heart of Albion. Meanwhile, the fanatic clergy, in an act of desperation and power, forged a permit to unleash the most terrible weapon, the use of magical beasts, summoned monsters, and war beasts like dragons and behemoths. The war was becoming grossly unfair. In the midst of this chaos, a lone agent arrived with 2 letters at the Alliance camp. The message was addressed to the 4 young leaders of the cause: Erla Bjorn's daughter of Clan Vonnegunder, Alistair II Maclasrak, Erik Thorvaldsson, son of the Konunga of Midgard, and Godric Domnavaros, 2nd Prince of Albion. The first letter announced that the northeastern settlements of Germany, Nordweg, Swithiod, Danmork, would rise in rebellion and come to their aid, and that they should prepare, for they too would bring their own war beasts to even the scales. The agent delivered the second letter, this time sealed with a black, unknown wax. It was written in a sharp, ancient script. "Do not await my aid in daylight,
But when the night is impenetrable, and you feel the cold bite to the marrow of your bones, then you shall know that an ally rides by your side." Alistair read aloud. They all froze as they saw the name of the sender, Vlad Dracula. They looked at each other, and with a smile tinged with fear, Erla voiced the thoughts of all. All help is welcome.
Chapter 8. War on Multiple Fronts. The next great land battle was a clash of titans. In the heart of Gemini, the combined might of Latium's legions and Gemini's steel crashed against the lines of the Northern Confederation and the Northern Alliance. The enemy unleashed hell. Gemini launched its wyverns and behemoths, while Latium reinforced the assault with long-range magical siege attacks. The battle became almost disproportional. The alliance was held together only by a precarious synergy of leadership. Alistair's tactical genius, Erla's inspiring fury on the front lines, and the leadership of Princes Godric and Eric, which sustained the army's morale. Their only desperate objective was to hold out until sunset, clinging to the promise of their new, shadowy ally. The carnage raged for hours. The cavalry was exhausted in desperate charges to divert the beasts. The warriors at the shield walls endured, their bodies and wills drained by the constant attacks. The mages rationed their mana, some being forced to switch to melee combat. The archers counted their last arrows, and the magic cannons began to mix their arcane munitions with solid shot, a desperate measure to not fall silent. On the coast, the few remaining galleons ran out of ammunition and began to prepare for boarding actions, ready to fight ship to ship. It seemed they would be finished, until suddenly the sun fell. A glacial wave spread across the battlefield, a tenebrous chill that had nothing to do with the evening. The promised aid had arrived. An army of the undead and beasts of the night emerged from the shadows of the forest. Strange carriages wrapped in thick metal, powered by steam engines, pierced the enemy lines, striking the behemoths directly. Ghouls armed with a kind of box that shot explosive bolts of lightning moved amongst the enemy ranks, their attacks striking without fail. Vlad had come to the fray. The scales began to tip in favor of the Northern Alliance and the Northern Confederation. Finally, the enemy broke and retreated. No pursuit was given. The troops were too exhausted. It was time to make a fort and recover for the next move. The next day, Vlad met with the alliance leaders. "I know of the conspiracy in the clergy," he said, his quiet voice resonating in the command tent. "We have a common enemy, but I must explain that the voice the fanatics hear is not the real voice, but another enemy, one still more mysterious." It seemed Vlad knew more about this enemy, but he would not give more details. "You are not yet ready to know," he concluded. "The objective is to achieve a ceasefire and sign a peace. This must not be a war that should continue. The fanatics must be purged." As the alliance recovered and assimilated this new, terrible information, the war continued on other fronts. Around the 16th of Sagittarius in 7027, Gallia's fleet was intercepted and defeated by the navy of Eru. "And since when do you command yourself that you can pass through my seas without my permission?" was the message from the High King of Eru. Gallia, in its greatly inflated ego, thought they could win against them. But Eru responded with magical cannonades and sea serpents provided by Midgard, forcing the Gallian retreat. By the 20th of Gemini in 7027, the final pieces were moving into place. Gallia, frustrated at sea, marched overland towards the capital city to reinforce its defenses. Thrake moved its regiment of magical beasts, and Hellas remained on guard. Sakar watched from afar, witnessing unprecedented events. And from the south, the powerful army of Hispania marched towards the capital city. while the forces of Gemini were forced to retreat slowly, unable to completely halt the advance of the Northern Alliance.
Chapter 9. Audience. Around the 21st of Cancer in Orbis 7027, the Northern Alliance marched directly on the capital city. Their advance was a statement of intent, but they did so with a stern warning from Vlad Dracula. "Do not attack," he had told them. "If you assault the heart of the faith, even if you are right, you will become enemies of all Terra. Your right is to convene an audience. Use it. Wait until all your enemies are gathered, and then the agents of chaos will reveal themselves." On the 2nd of Leo, the stage was set. The capital city was heavily guarded, prepared for a siege. Fear and uncertainty hung in the air. The news of the unholy alliance between the northern kingdoms and the heretic Vlad Dracula had spread like wildfire. When the herald of the Northern Alliance formally requested the audience, the corrupt clerics sneered and tried to refuse. But at that moment, a messenger arrived at a full gallop from the south. The earth began to tremble, and a deep, resonant chant grew in volume. The army of Hispania had arrived. Its entire military force marched in an endless column. A triumphant smile spread across the clerics' faces. "The war ends today," they murmured. The king in person, Guillermo I del Morez of Ecruval, rode at the head of his army. When Guillermo entered the command tent where the representatives of Germany, Gallia, and Latium were gathered, he did not address them, but the clerics. "Why has the audience not begun? Do you not see they are requesting an audience?" he said, his voice a slab of stone. "To continue this war is a very stupid thing, and more so coming from you, clerics. Too much blood has already been spilt, and all for a supposed vision." "It is the voice itself who has spoken and shown us a prophecy," a cleric retorted haughtily. "And did the matrimonium corroborate this?" King Guillermo countered. "Let us not forget why the matrimonium is formed." The clerics responded. "They are in and where are they?" Guillermo interrupted, his voice sharp. "I do not see them. They do not answer the rune calls, not even the letters." The king continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "I know why Gallia wishes to attack Albion. It is but a foolish squabble with the northern nobles. Germany merely wants more land. It is not interested in that stupid vision. And the others simply answered your call. But you, clerics, you instigated the extermination of House Maklasrak and Clan Vanagander." "You have no proof," a cleric hissed. "Indeed," Guillermo replied, in a way that showed he knew he would get nowhere with the conversation. "I know what Vlad told me you are planning." "Heresy!" several clerics shouted. "I have hired a company of Nahual warriors from the kingdom of Anahuac. Right now they are rescuing the rest of the council." A cleric began, his face a mask of panic. "You would not—" In that instant, the great alarm of the capital city rang out. The central runestone resonated with the rescued cleric's message. "Treason from the clerics! They have defiled the sanctuary! They have murdered the matrimonium!" The 20 clerics laughed, an inhuman, terrible sound. "Oh, I wanted to play a little longer," they said in unison. Then, before the horrified eyes of all the leaders, they transformed. Their bodies swelled and twisted, tearing the fine silks of their clerical robes. The command tent was ripped apart like parchment as they grew into 4-meter-tall humanoid giants. The force of the transformation sent the generals and King Guillermo staggering back, drawing their swords. Seeing the blasphemy made flesh, the monstrosity that had once worn the symbol of their faith, King Guillermo clenched his fist on the sacred emblem of his hilt. By the true voice, give us strength and protect us from these ultra-beasts, he murmured, his voice a solemn, desperate prayer in the midst of the chaos. Struggling out from the tatters of canvas and broken poles, they saw each of these 20 ultra-beasts slam their fists on the ground, and from portals ripped in reality, they summoned their own armies, arthropod-like abominations, each moving on 10 sharp limbs, with a semi-humanoid torso, from which sprouted additional arms ending in sharp claws and covered in a segmented carapace that shone like black iron. King Guillermo and the other commanders barely managed to safeguard themselves, retreating hastily to rejoin their respective armies as the battlefield filled with a new and terrifying enemy.
Chapter 10. Chaos in the Capital City. The chaos was instant and absolute. The clerics' transformation into 20 ultra-beasts and the summoning of their abyssal armies plunged the battlefield into a primordial terror. For an instant, the world's order broke. Then the leaders' voices rose, forging a new desperate alliance from the remnants of old enmities. The battlefield fractured into 3 fronts of sheer survival. In the center, King Guillermo of Hispania took command. Form phalanxes, pikes to the front, mages of Latium suppressing fire. His legions, alongside the disciplined regiments of Germania and Gallia, faced the bulk of the horde and 8 of the ultra-beasts. It was a wall of steel and faith against a tide of claws and chitin. While the Germanian pikemen held back the abyssal creatures, the king's Nahual warriors moved like ghosts, climbing the gigantic ultra-beasts to drive their obsidian-edged blades into the joints of their carapaces. On the left flank, the warriors of the Northern Confederation found the battle for which they were born. Facing 6 of the ultra-beasts, they sought not defense, but glory. "For the sagas that will be sung," roared their chieftain, launching into a charge. "To the end!" Their berserker fury was a force of nature. It was a battle of sacrifice, a storm of suicidal courage that, though it cost countless lives, kept 6 of the abominations contained. On the right flank, the Northern Alliance faced the 6 remaining ultra-beasts, the most dangerous, for they channeled magic with the skill of an archmage. "Aericus, Godric, flank it on the left. I need its flank exposed," Alastair commanded. "Erla, prepare for my signal." The battle became a coordinated hunt. Alastair harassed their target with whips of fire. Aericus and Godric pressed its flank, creating the opening Alastair awaited. "Now," Alastair thought, transmitting the order as he cast a spell that heated the ultra-beast's carapace red-hot. In that instant, Erla charged, and her glacial axe shattered the superheated metal. Night began to fall, and with it, hope. The armies were on the verge of collapse. It was then that the promised cold arrived. The host of Vlad Draclia did not charge with a war cry, but with a sepulchral silence. Their steam-powered war carriages pierced the monsters' lines, and their ghouls, armed with strange boxes that shot lightning, moved like specters through the chaos. The army of the night, immune to fear and pain, became the deciding factor. The tide turned. As the abyssal regiment was pushed back by the allied forces, one of the ultra-beasts, wounded but incredibly dangerous, tried to flee towards the forest. "Finish that beast," roared King Guillermo. "We will hold back these abyssal fiends. Do not let it escape." Erla, Alastair, Aericus, and Godric, along with Vlad, initiated the pursuit and cornered the creature in a forest clearing. Vlad began to weave a complex spell. The ultra-beast, sensing the threat, charged directly at him. Seeing the danger, Aericus threw himself forward to intercept the attack, shielding Vlad with his own body. The beast's claws sank deep into the prince, gravely wounding him. "Now!" Aericus shouted. Vlad unleashed the critical magic strike. the opening was exploited by a combined attack from the others that felled the creature. The Ultra Beast's corpse imploded, and from its remains emerged a humanoid form of thick black matter, a living shadow. Before they could react, it emitted a sonic attack that stunned and floored them all. Only Vlad, though stumbling, resisted the attack. In a desperate, improvised act, he knelt by the wounded Ophiuchus and forged a blood pact, augmenting the prince's strength for one last counterattack, while Vlad rushed to recover the others. When they recovered, the plan formed without words. The 5 heroes joined their powers. Their combined energy formed a rainbow-hued aura that materialized as a beam of prismatic power. The beam struck the shadow, forcing it to its knees, and then it laughed. "Sufficient. For another time," it said, its voice a resonance of eons. Vlad replied to it in the ancient tongue of the divine voice. Erla, Alistair, Godric, and Ophiuchus looked at each other shocked. They had never heard words that sounded so similar to the descriptions of the creator voice. The silhouette stopped laughing, and as it vanished, it replied with something only Vlad understood. Vlad, for his part, simply smiled. "What did it say?" asked Erla. "Nothing you could comprehend," Vlad answered. "Not yet." Before leaving, he approached Prince Ophiuchus. He spoke quietly of the pact they had made. Then he and his army vanished into the night.
Chapter 11. The Tenuous Peace. The next day, in a battle-scarred capital city, King Guillermo was notified of the shadow's nature. An emergency assembly was called, gathering the monarchs of Centra with the rescued members of the Via Delecos Council. Together, they began the monumental task of repairing the damage. 4 immediate priorities were established. First, to purge the corrupt society the fanatics had entrenched in the city and the faith itself. Second, to analyze the nature of the new enemy, the Ultra Beasts and their abyssal warriors, and the shadowy entity that controlled them. Third, to put the treacherous Albion nobles who had initiated the plot on trial. And fourth, to levy a considerable fine against Golia and Germani as reparation for the war they had helped to cause. News of the battle, verified by the recordings of the Great Runestone, spread throughout Terra. From the kingdoms of America and Africa to the distant shores of Oceanos and the ancient empires of Asarion, the nations reinforced their borders, aware that a threat from another world now weighed upon them all. Finally, on the 7th of Virgo, in Orbis 7027, the Pact of Capital was signed. A non-aggression and peace treaty was ratified by all the kingdoms of Centra. The Northern Alliance returned home. The senseless war was over, but it had left behind countless questions that would not be answered soon. As the ship sailed towards the shores of Albion, Erla and Alistair held hands. "Let us go home," she said. And in her words there was not only relief, but the silent promise to be ready for when the darkness returned to their world.